My name is Deepak Malhotra, and I'm a professor of negotiation at Harvard Business School. I'm also the co-author of the book Negotiation Genius with Max Bazerman, and I'm the author of the book Negotiating the Impossible. In this series of videos, I'm talking about negotiation, and in each clip, I talk about one insight, one principle, one tactic, one strategy that might be helpful to you as you navigate your own deals and disputes. In this video, what I want to talk about is barriers to negotiation. And specifically, I want to talk about 3 types of barriers to negotiation that can derail deals that otherwise should happen. Now let's start with clarifying what do we mean by deals that should happen. Because in my experience, most negotiations in the world shouldn't end in a deal. If we are not the right partners for each other, if you would be better off with someone else, or I would be able to get a better deal with someone else, the two of us should not reach a deal. It doesn't create value. We're not the right partners for each other. And that is the modal case in negotiations. Not everybody is the partner with whom you're going to create maximum value, almost by definition. So not reaching a deal is not a tragedy. The problem is when a deal should have happened, when we were the right partners for each other, when we were the people who could have created the most value together, but something got in the way of us achieving that value creating outcome. Something got in the way of us reaching an understanding or an agreement. How to avoid that? In my experience, one of the things that you need to do as a negotiator before you launch into negotiations, before you take the first step in the process, as you're preparing for the negotiation, one of the things you need to do to be an effective negotiator is to spend some time thinking about the barriers to negotiation. What are the kinds of things that might kill a deal that otherwise should happen? And I find it useful to put these barriers or categorize these barriers into 3 types. It helps organize your thinking and it helps organize your strategizing. So what are the 3 types of barriers? First, psychological barriers. These are the things that are happening in my mind or in the minds of other people in the negotiation. Perhaps there's not enough trust. Perhaps we don't like each other very much. Perhaps there's a lot of pessimism because previous attempts at negotiation have failed. Perhaps there is a sense of grievance. These are psychological elements that might get in the way of a deal. The second type of barrier is what we call a structural barrier to negotiation. Think of a structural barrier as a barrier that presents itself just because of the rules of the game that we're playing, just because of the design of the environment in which we are negotiating. For example, a structural barrier might be that there's very little time. We have just too little time to try and reach a deal that's actually quite complex. A structural barrier might be that the wrong people are at the table, or the people that I need to be talking to are not accessible to me. In conflicts of various kinds, a structural barrier might be that there's too much media attention, and it's making it hard for people to make concessions without looking bad. So these are design elements that are getting in the way of a deal that we think should happen. The third type of barrier is what we call tactical barriers. Tactical barriers are actions that we actually take in the negotiation. Something that I actually am doing in the negotiation or something the other side is doing in the negotiation that is causing there to be a barrier to us reaching an agreement. Now, usually these behaviors are not completely crazy. They're usually justifiable. Usually the things that I'm doing in a negotiation or the other side is doing in the negotiation, there's some rationale for it. It's just that it's also having the consequence of making a deal more difficult. For example, I'm not sharing very much information. Perhaps wisely because I don't trust you very much, but it might also make a deal difficult to achieve. Or you are being very aggressive and you're asking for a really aspirational amount in the negotiation. Now that may make sense because the more you ask for, perhaps if a deal does happen, the more you end up with at the end of the day. But along the way, you are also making the deal a little bit more difficult because we might never be able to bridge that difference. Another tactical barrier might simply be that we're focusing too narrowly on 1 or 2 issues when by broadening the scope of the negotiation, we could have actually reached an agreement. So as you think about this from the point of view of day 1 in your negotiation, as you think about the day that you're going to start the process and you're building your strategy, in my experience, when you take the time to think through what are the psychological, what are the structural, and what are the tactical barriers that might get in the way of the deal, it allows you to now think about how you need to adjust your strategy so that you can start knocking down some of these barriers. What are the things we may need to do given that there is pessimism or given that there is mistrust? How do we deal with the fact that the wrong people might be at the table? How do we deal with the fact that there may not be enough time to do everything we want to do? How do we deal with the fact that both parties are coming in rather aggressively, or that we might be focusing too narrowly on the scope of the negotiation because we're just trying to make some progress, but it might make a broader, complete deal less likely? Once you recognize the barriers you face, it's not surprisingly more likely that you'll have a strategy that you conceive of, that you build, and that you launch, which will be more effective at overcoming those barriers so the deals that should happen actually come to fruition. Good luck.